It was the small lamp over the sink in my kitchen. The one I never used. The one I always left off because it cast a weak, yellow glow that made the room look older than it already was. I remember thinking, in a distant, disconnected way, that the house looked like it was waiting for me to notice. I hadn't turned it on. That was the only thought in my head for a long moment. Not fear. Not confusion. Just a simple, stubborn certainty. I stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock in the living room, trying to remember when I could have flipped that switch. Couldn't. I told myself I must have done it without thinking. People forget things, especially people my age. I was 59, recently retired, and still learning how to live in a house that felt too big and too empty. I turned the light off and went back to bed. The next morning, the laundry room light was on. That one bothered me more. I hadn't done laundry in days. I hadn't even walked past that door since the weekend. I stood in the hallway with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, staring at the thin line of light spilling out from under the door, and felt a small, unpleasant twist in my stomach. Again, I told myself it was nothing. Old wiring. Tired brain. The kind of harmless mistake you only notice when you're alone long enough to pay attention to small things. 2 days later, it was the garage light. Then the guest bedroom. Then the lamp in the corner of the living room that I only ever turned on when company came over, which almost never happened anymore. It was never the same room twice in a row. And it was never a room I had just been in. First, it felt like coincidence. After a while, it started to feel like timing. I live alone. My wife passed 3 years ago. The kids are grown, scattered across different states, busy with their own lives. The house is quiet in a way that feels heavy but familiar. I gotten used to that silence. It was honest, predictable. This was different. This felt like the house was paying attention to me. I started keeping track. Not with a notebook or anything obvious. Just in my head. Which lights I turned off. Which rooms I used. Where I spent my evenings. I didn't tell anyone. Saying it out loud would have made it sound ridiculous. One night, I sat in the living room with all the lights off and read until my eyes hurt. When I finally got up to get a glass of water, the kitchen light was on. I stood in the doorway holding my book like I might need it for balance, and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No creaking floors. No sounds that didn't belong to the house. I turned the light off and went back to my chair. Another time, I stayed in my bedroom all evening, watching an old movie with the volume low. Around midnight, I heard a soft click from somewhere down the hall. A switch. I didn't go look. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart beat a little harder than it should have. I checked the doors. All of them. Front, back, garage. Locked. I checked the windows. Locked. I checked the crawl space and the attic even though I hated doing that. Nothing. No signs of anyone else. No moved boxes. No disturbed dust. No footprints. I told myself the only thing that had changed was me. Then I fell asleep on the couch. I don't remember drifting off. I only remember waking up with that sharp, uncomfortable awareness that comes when your body knows something before your mind does. The TV was off. The room was dark. But the small lamp near the stairs was on. What made my stomach tighten wasn't the light itself. It was the hallway. I had left the hallway light on when I sat down. It was off. That meant something in my house wasn't just turning lights on. It was turning them off. I stood there for a long time, listening to the house breathe. The quiet tick of cooling pipes. The faint hum of electricity behind the walls. The kind of normal sounds you only notice when you're trying to prove to yourself that nothing is wrong. The next day, I set a trap. Nothing dramatic. Just a thin strip of clear tape across the inside of the garage door. Low enough that I wouldn't hit it by accident. Tight enough that it would tear if the door opened. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't write it down. I wanted to know if something in my house was changing without me. That evening, I turned off every light and stood in the doorway, looking at the dark rooms like they were waiting for instructions. When I came back the next afternoon, the tape was broken. The garage door was closed. Locked. Exactly the way I'd left it. Inside, the guest bedroom light was on. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that I hadn't imagined it. Dread because that meant I hadn't. I called the police. They were polite, professional. They walked through the house, checked every room, every closet, every place a person could hide. They checked the attic and the crawl space. They found nothing. One of them suggested maybe I'd forgotten about the tape. Another said electrical issues can do strange things. Old houses, old wiring, old switches. I nodded, thanked them, watched them leave. That night, I didn't sleep in my bedroom. I sat in a chair in the living room with all the lights off, listening to the house make its usual sounds. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I was being smart. The 3:04 a.m. I heard it. A soft, deliberate click. Not in the hallway. Not in the kitchen. In my bedroom. The bedside lamp turned on. Light spilled into the hallway and stopped at my feet. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched the doorway. Someone was standing there. I couldn't see their face. The light was behind them. All I could see was a shape that didn't shift or sway or breathe the way a person should. It was just there, perfectly still, like a cutout placed in front of the door. We stayed like that for a long time. Then the light turned off. The shape disappeared with it. In the morning, every light in the house was on. I didn't wait long after that. I packed what I needed. I called a realtor. I stayed with my sister until the papers were signed. I never went back after sunset. The new place is smaller, quieter, easier to keep track of. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still check which rooms are lit. Because whatever learned my schedule never needed to follow me. The first time I realized my apartment had more space than it was supposed to, I was standing in my socks in the hallway, staring at a door I was certain hadn't been there the day before. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't glowing or humming or doing anything that would have made the moment feel important. It was just a door. Plain white. Cheap handle. The kind you'd expect in a building that had been remodeled too many times by people who cared more about speed than accuracy. The problem was simple. My apartment didn't have a door there. I'd lived in that place for almost 2 years. Long enough to know every creak in the floor, every spot where the paint bubbled from old water damage, every place the light switch had to be flipped twice before it worked. The hallway was short. Bedroom on one side, bathroom on the other, living room at the end. There was no room for another door. I stood there for a long time, telling myself I must have forgotten it, that maybe it led to a closet I never used, or a maintenance space the building had added, or that my memory was playing tricks on me, the way it sometimes does when you get past 60 and start misplacing small, harmless details. Still, I didn't open it. I went to work instead, and spent the whole day with the uncomfortable feeling that I'd left something important unfinished. That night, the door was still there. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. The room behind it was small. No windows, bare walls, a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. No furniture, no dust, no smell. Just empty space that felt too clean for a building that old. I stepped inside. The floor felt solid. The walls were real. I even knocked on one, half expecting it to sound hollow. Didn't. There was nothing in the room. Nothing written. Nothing hidden. Nothing that explained why it existed. I went back out, closed the door, and told myself the building manager must have done some kind of renovation without telling me. The next morning, the door was gone. Just a blank stretch of wall where it had been. I stood there with my hand on the paint, feeling stupid and a little embarrassed, like I'd imagined the whole thing. I almost laughed. Almost. 2 weeks passed. I stopped thinking about it. Then one night, I came home late and found a different door. This one was at the end of the hallway, where the wall met the living room. It was taller than the first one, narrower. The handle was old brass, polished in a way that didn't match anything else in the apartment. I didn't touch it. I went to bed instead. In the morning, it was still there. I opened it. The room behind it was long and thin, like a storage space that had been stretched too far. There were shelves along one wall, empty except for a single cardboard box sitting in the middle. I didn't pick it up. I stood in the doorway and felt that quiet, crawling sense that I was being invited to do something I wouldn't be able to undo. I closed the door. When I came back from work, it was gone. I told myself it was stress, or exhaustion, or some strange trick of perspective in an old building with crooked walls. I started paying closer attention to my apartment, like that might keep it honest. It didn't help. The doors kept appearing. Sometimes in the hallway, sometimes in the living room. Once, in the back corner of my bedroom, half hidden behind a chair. They were never the same. Different sizes, different handles, different paint. But they all led to rooms that didn't belong. One room had a single chair in the center, facing a blank wall. One room had a table with a stack of yellowed newspapers I didn't recognize. One room was completely empty except for a light switch that didn't turn anything on. The worst part wasn't the rooms themselves. It was that they never stayed. They would appear for a day, sometimes two, then vanish, leaving behind a wall that looked like it had always been that way. I called the building manager. He came up, looked around, and told me everything was exactly as it should be. He said there had never been extra rooms, never been extra doors. He suggested I might want to talk to someone if I was seeing things that weren't there. I didn't call him again. After that, the rooms started changing. They began to look used. One had muddy footprints on the floor. Another had a mattress on the ground, with an indentation like someone had just gotten up. Another had writing on the walls. Not words, just lines. Hundreds of them, scratched into the paint like someone had been counting days. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked. One night, I woke up because I could hear something moving in my apartment. Not footsteps. Not exactly. It sounded like a wall being touched from the inside. A slow, dragging sound, like fingers sliding over paint. I lay there, holding my breath, listening to it move from the living room toward the hallway. Then I heard a new sound, a door opening. In my apartment, I didn't get up. I didn't look. I just waited until the noise stopped. In the morning, there was a new door in the hallway. It was already open. The room behind it looked like my bedroom. Same bed, same dresser, same small crack in the ceiling near the window. Except the bed was unmade. And the room smelled warm, like someone had been sleeping there. I closed the door and sat on the floor until my legs went numb. After that, I started losing time. Not hours. Not anything obvious. Just small pieces of the day that I couldn't account for. I'd sit down to watch the news and realize it was dark outside. I'd go to bed and wake up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The doors kept coming. One night, I came home and found 3 of them. One in the hallway, one in the living room, one in the kitchen. All open, all leading to different rooms. I stood there, keys in my hand, and understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. The rooms weren't appearing in my apartment. My apartment was being used as a hallway. I didn't stay that night. I packed a bag and went to a motel on the edge of town. I slept with the lights on and the TV playing, just to have something familiar in the room with me. The next day, I went back with a friend to get the rest of my things. There were no doors, just walls, just my normal, small, ordinary apartment. We moved my things out in one afternoon. I didn't tell him why. Sometimes I still dream about hallways that don't end. Sometimes I wake up and expect to see a new door waiting for me. And sometimes I wonder if those rooms ever really disappeared, or if they're just waiting for a place to open again. The scariest part wasn't when my car stopped working. It wasn't even when I realized my phone had no signal. The scariest part was when the road started giving me back things I hadn't left behind. I had driven that stretch of highway more times than I could count. It cut through a long, empty part of the state, connecting 2 small towns that most people only pass through. No lights, no real landmarks, just trees, fences, and fields that looked the same no matter the season. I was 62 and still working part-time, mostly because I didn't know what to do with myself at home. That night, I was driving back later than usual after helping a friend move some furniture. My shoulders ached, my hands felt stiff on the wheel, and I remember thinking that I should have left earlier. The radio faded into static about 10 minutes after I turned onto the highway. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how quiet everything felt. Not peaceful, not calm, empty. The kind of empty that makes you notice your own breathing, the soft hum of the engine, the faint rattle somewhere behind the dashboard. The headlights carved out a narrow tunnel in front of me, and everything outside that tunnel felt a farther away than it should have been. About 20 minutes in, I realized I hadn't passed the old gas station yet. The one with the faded red sign, the broken soda machine out front. The place I used as a marker without even thinking about it. If I passed that, I knew I was halfway home. I told myself I'd just missed it. A few minutes later, I saw the mailbox. It was red, bent, hanging crooked on a wooden post that leaned like it was tired of standing. The paint was chipped, and one side looked darker, like it had been rained on too many times without drying properly. I passed it without slowing down. 5 minutes later, I passed it again. That was when I checked my speed. Still steady. No turns. No stops. The road behind me looked normal. The road ahead looked normal. I told myself I was tired. Then I passed the mailbox a third time. I pulled over. The engine idled in a way that suddenly sounded too loud. The trees pressed in on both sides of the road, dark and close, like they were listening. My headlights washed over the grass and the crooked post, and I felt that slow, creeping sense that comes when your brain starts running out of normal explanations. I got out of the car. The air felt colder than it should have. Heavier, too. Like there was moisture in it that hadn't decided to become fog yet. I walked a few steps back toward the mailbox. It was exactly the same. Same dent. Same peeling paint. Same crooked angle. I looked up and down the road. No intersections. No side roads. No places where I could have turned around without noticing. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling that uncomfortable pressure behind my eyes, the kind you get when you're trying very hard not to panic. I got back in the car and drove. The road didn't change. The trees didn't change. The mailbox came back. This time, there was someone standing near it. He hadn't been there before. He stood a few feet off the road, facing the trees, not looking at me, not moving. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes that blended into the shadows. For a moment, I wondered if he was just part of the scenery I hadn't noticed before, like a scarecrow or a broken fence post. I slowed down as I passed him. He didn't turn his head. He didn't react at all. I kept driving, telling myself he was just someone who had broken down, or someone walking home, or someone who didn't matter. A mile later, my phone rang. The screen lit up, but there were no bars. No service. Just an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer it. The radio crackled back to life for a second, and all I heard was breathing. Slow, steady, close. Then it went silent again. The mailbox came back. So did the man. This time he was closer to the road. Close enough that the headlights caught his face. Or at least the space where his face should have been. It wasn't blurred. It wasn't hidden. It was just wrong. Like my eyes refused to finish the shape. Like looking at him was making something in my head quietly step aside. I rolled down the window. "Hey!" I said, and my voice sounded thinner than I expected. "Do you know where this road goes?" He didn't look at me. He lifted one arm and pointed straight ahead. The gesture was slow, deliberate. I didn't want to follow where he pointed, but there was nowhere else to go. I drove. The sky started to change. Not darken. Not exactly. The colors shifted in a way I couldn't explain. The sun, what little I could still see of it, started sinking between the trees on the wrong side of the road. I checked the time. The clock on the dashboard flickered, then went blank. My fuel gauge started dropping faster than it should have. The road stayed the same. The trees stayed the same. The mailbox came back again. The man was gone. My phone rang. This time I answered it. "Hello," I said. There was a pause. Then someone on the other end took a breath. They said my name. Not the way a stranger would. Not the way someone reading it off a screen would. The way my wife used to say it when she wanted me to come into the kitchen and see something. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Who is this?" I asked. The voice didn't answer. It started describing my car. The color. The small crack in the corner of the windshield. The way the dashboard light flickered sometimes when I hit a bump. Then it started describing me. The jacket I was wearing. The way my shoulders were hunched forward. The scar on my left thumb from a job I'd had 20 years ago. I hung up. The engine sputtered once and died. The car rolled to a stop right next to the mailbox. The trees felt closer now. The road felt narrower. The air felt thick enough to push against. I sat there, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine, my own breathing too loud in the quiet. Then I saw them. Not just one. Not just the man. Shapes between the trees. Tall. Still. Watching. They didn't move toward me. They didn't have to. My phone rang again. I didn't answer it. I opened the door and stepped out. The night felt heavier than it should have. Like I was moving through something denser than air. I took a few steps toward the trees, then stopped. The road behind me didn't look like a road anymore. It looked like something pretending to be one. The mailbox was still there. The man was standing next to it again. Closer than before. This time he looked at me. And he smiled. My phone rang. I answered it. I don't remember what the voice said after that. I remember waking up in a hospital bed with bright lights and the smell of disinfectant. They told me they found my car in a ditch near the edge of town. They told me I'd been missing for 6 hours. They told me I was lucky someone had seen the headlights before it got fully dark. I asked them about the mailbox. They said there wasn't one. I asked them about the man. They said there was no one else there when they arrived. I don't drive that road anymore. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I see a red shape at the edge of my headlights, and my phone starts to ring. The first thing I noticed was that the shadows were late. That probably doesn't make sense. It didn't to me either at first. Shadows don't arrive late. They don't arrive at all. They just happen. Light changes and they follow. Except that morning they didn't. I was standing in my workshop behind the house, holding a cup of coffee and watching the sun climb over the trees. It was one of those quiet rural mornings where the world feels like it's still deciding whether to wake up. I'm 65, retired, and I spend most of my days fixing things that don't need fixing anymore, just to keep my hands busy. The light came in through the side window, but the shadows didn't move with it. The workbench should have cast a long shape across the floor. The shelves should have drawn lines along the wall. Instead, everything stayed the same for a few seconds too long. Then, all at once, the shadows snapped into place. I remember standing there, coffee cooling in my hand, telling myself I'd imagined it. I do strange things in the morning. Brains fill in gaps. I shrugged it off and got to work. That was my mistake. I live on the edge of a small town where people still wave at each other from their trucks, and the loudest sound at night is usually a dog barking 2 streets over. My wife passed 5 years ago, and since then, I've gotten used to talking to myself more than I probably should. The house is quiet. The workshop is quieter. By noon, I noticed something else. When I moved, my shadow didn't always follow right away. It was subtle, just a fraction of a second. I'd reach for a tool, and my shadow would hesitate before copying me. I told myself it was the angle of the light, the clutter in the room, anything that didn't sound like what it felt like. By late afternoon, I started testing it. I lifted my hand slowly. My shadow lifted its hand. A moment later, I stepped to the side. My shadow stepped too. Late again. I laughed. Out loud. The sound bounced off the walls and came back thinner. Get a grip, I told myself. You're seeing things. But the feeling didn't go away. That evening, I noticed the shadows in the house doing the same thing. In the hallway, in the living room, in the kitchen, always just a little behind, like they were watching me move first. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and turned on the light. For a heartbeat, there was no shadow behind me. Then it appeared. Wrong. It wasn't shaped like me. It was close. Close enough that if you didn't look too hard, you might not notice. But the shoulders were slightly wider. The head tilted at an angle I wasn't using. One arm hung a little lower than mine. I turned. The shadow didn't. Corrected itself a second later. I stepped back from the mirror and felt my heart start to beat faster than it should have for something so quiet, so ordinary looking. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I needed more sleep. I told myself a lot of things that day. By afternoon, the shadows started doing something new. They began to move when I wasn't. I'd be sitting in my chair, reading, and I'd see movement in the corner of my eye. Just a shift, just a stretch. When I looked directly at it, everything was normal again. Almost. I called my daughter that night. I didn't tell her about the shadows. I told her I wasn't sleeping well. She suggested I see a doctor. I told her I would. We both knew I probably wouldn't. After we hung up, I turned off the lights and went to bed. In the dark, I could still see my shadow. That shouldn't have been possible. There was no light source, no glow from the windows, no lamp, but it was there on the wall, faint and steady, like something remembered instead of something cast. It wasn't shaped like me anymore. I didn't turn on the light. I lay there, staring, and waited for it to go away. Didn't. The next day, I stayed in the house. I closed the curtains. I turned off lights. I tried to get rid of every sharp edge that could make a shadow. It didn't matter. They still showed up. Soft, blurry, but there. And they were faster now. Sometimes they moved before I did. I'd reach for a glass, and my shadow's hand would already be there. I'd stand up, and it would already be standing, like it was predicting me, or practicing. By the third day, I started talking to them. I know how that sounds. But when you live alone long enough, silence stops being empty. It starts feeling crowded. "Stop it," I said once, standing in the living room with the curtains half drawn. My shadow raised its head. I hadn't. That was the moment I understood something was no longer pretending. I backed away slowly. The shadow stayed where it was. Then it took a step forward. The light in the room didn't change. The shadow did. I went to the door. The shadow didn't follow. It went the other way, into the hallway. I grabbed my keys and left the house without turning off the lights. I drove around town for an hour, sitting in parking lots, watching people go in and out of stores, reminding myself what normal looked like. When I finally went back, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Every light was on. Every room was empty. Every shadow was where it was supposed to be. For a while, I thought it was over. That night, I dreamed I was standing in my workshop, watching myself work. Only I wasn't the one moving. I woke up with my heart pounding and the taste of metal in my mouth. The shadows were back the next morning. They were better now. They matched me almost perfectly. Almost. I started keeping the lights on all the time. I slept with lamps glowing in every room. It didn't help. The shadows didn't care where the light came from anymore. They only cared where I was. One afternoon, I stood in the living room and said, "What do you want?" My shadow turned its head. It looked at me, smiled. Shadows aren't supposed to smile. After that, I started losing small pieces of time. I'd sit down at the table and look up to find the sun in a different place. I'd go into the workshop and come back with tools I didn't remember picking up. Once, I found mud on my shoes and no memory of leaving the house. The shadows started lagging again. Not behind me, behind themselves, like something else was learning to use them. The last night I spent in that house, I woke up because I could hear movement in the living room. Not footsteps, something softer, like fabric sliding over the floor. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't need to. My shadow wasn't on the wall behind me anymore. It was in the doorway, standing upright, facing me. Took a step forward. I took a step back. It didn't copy me. Kept coming. I left with nothing but my wallet and my keys. I didn't lock the door. I didn't look back. I stay with my daughter now. She says I look better. Healthier. Like I finally started resting. Maybe she's right. But sometimes, late at night, I see a shape on the wall that doesn't quite match me. And sometimes it moves first,